Hey guys, if you're shopping for knives and gear, make sure you check out the description of the video you're watching right now for a link to my Amazon store where I've compiled some of the very best items available, including some of my own personal recommendations. Thanks! What's going on, YouTube? Middle Complex here, and today I've got a super cool knife review slash knife overview to share with you guys. This is the Shirogorov Quantum. Oh my goodness, this is beautiful. If you guys remember me unboxing this, you'll know that I just about died on camera. This thing is just incredible. You also probably, a lot of you know that I, for a long time lusted after Shirogorov knives, specifically the F95T, which I was fortunate enough to handle here recently, and it exceeded my wildest expectations. It was just wonderful. I described Shirogorov action as being, a feeling of action that stands alone, truly, even amongst some of the greatest knives that I have ever handled. And I've handled a lot, guys. This isn't a rogue, really expensive knife on this channel. I've handled a lot of very expensive knives and a lot of inexpensive knives, right? I've got a lot to compare to. And I can confidently say that Shirogorov has that down. We're going to cover that here. Real quick, this knife was sent to me by @Al the Science Pal. Please give him a follow. It's because of people like him that I'm able to bring you guys daily knife content. It's also because of my generous patrons. So thanks so much for supporting me. You can check out my Patreon down in the description. Get your hands on some of those stickers. Before we get started here, Al actually sent me a link to some interesting facts about this knife and other Shirogorov knives. And this came from the Shirogorov forums, which came directly from, I believe, Sergei Shirogorov. And I want to give you guys some of this information. I'm also going to invite you to go read about this for yourself, so I will be linking it down in the description. You will need to translate it because Shirogorov knives are made in Russia, so the information is in Russian, so you got to use Google Translate. But yeah, check it out. And the reason is because this is a very expensive knife. This is an $1,100 knife, and people, have different emotional responses to hearing prices like that. Whether or not that price is justified to every individual person, we could argue infinitely about that, right? Whether or not the work that goes into this knife, it results in a higher price tag than normal. Yeah, actually, there's quite a bit here to back that up. So by no means am I saying that you absolutely have to spend that much money to get a quality tool. But if you want to get something like this, if you're looking for what Shirogorov brings to the table, which believe me, we're going to talk about, yeah, I can see how they got there. I'm going to read a couple of these to you guys that I think you might find interesting. During processing, titanium is heat treated several times to relieve stress and obtain the desired hardness and elasticity. I've heard of other makers doing that, but it's nice to know that they do it. Each blade is heat treated individually in protective packaging. Sometimes the maintenance cycle lasts more than a day. They also heat treat screws and pins. Steel is used for screws, pins, and I'm not sure what this word is, BONOKS. From which some manufacturers make their blades. So essentially, I'm sure it's not like, steel that's specifically designed for folding knives or necessarily like the most ultimate steel out there that could be used for a blade, but apparently the steel that they're using for some of the hardware, some of the internals, is actually steel that can be made into a blade. So that's interesting. I'm sure that's also not completely unique to Shirogorov knives, but it's nice to know. Let's see here. Despite the high technological equipment, the technologically advanced equipment, I'm sure, Google Translate, guys, of the workshop, we do the descent on our blades manually, meaning I would imagine that means they are hand ground. That's crazy. I will show a close-up of the blade here soon, and it seems impossibly perfect, even if guessing that a machine made it. I just don't understand. I was shocked to read that. I will show you guys the blade here in a sec. Let's see here. Each blade, after grinding on the grinder, is wiped with stones to remove marks from the tape. As a result, we have a clean and beautiful surface after tumbling. That's something that also shocked me because the finish on this thing looks like vapor blasting, which usually results in an incredibly even and very beautiful, smooth surface. A vapor blasted blade would be like the Custom Knife Factory snafu. I was shocked to find out that that was a tumbled finish. Very, very cool. Let's see here. All accessories for the workshop. Knives are made by us. We only purchase raw materials and balls for bearings. That means that everything from the shop, just like it says, everything is made by them. They only purchase the ball bearings that go into the multi-row bearing system, or MRBS, and the raw materials used for the knife. So that's pretty cool. These knives are 100% made in Russia. Nothing is outsourced or made in-house in the Shirogorov shop. So that's very, very cool. There's a ton of additional information, and that's kind of why I wanted to read that to you guys. I want you guys to go see what goes into stuff like this, because this is very different from, you know, it's titanium and M390 in this case, and I believe they're actually exploring Vanax 37 or Vanax Super Clean, which is also really cool. It's very different from a titanium and M390 knife that you might get from WE or Riot or ZT. Very quality manufacturers, but I've handled a ton of those, and I've handled now 3 Shirogorovs, and I can tell you confidently it is not the same thing, and it is very evident when you deploy this knife, when you look it over, you look at all the fitment of everything. Obviously, more went into this. So, yeah, that's a lot of the reason for the price tag there, but I feel like it's important to get that, to talk about that stuff right off the bat, so you guys don't sit through a 20-minute review just to be disappointed by the price tag. But, you know, also because it's important to know what, you know, the blood, sweat, and tears that go into something like this. All right, let's go ahead and do some size comparisons here. So up against the Ontario Rat Model 1, the Rat 1 is coming in at 8.6 inches overall, and you can see there that it is substantially shorter. Oh, you know what? We didn't even measure it. Let's go ahead and measure it here real quick. The overall length of the Shirogorov Quantum, at least I hope I didn't measure it already, coming in at about 8.8 inches overall. The blade length, in areas you could say it's under 4 inches, but the cutting edge is definitely 4 inches. So that's essentially a 4-inch blade. That's pretty cool. How about up against the Spyderco PM2? Spyderco PM2 coming in at 8.3 inches overall. How about up against the Benchmade Reptilian, or in this case the Ritter Hogue? The Ritter Hogue is coming in at 8 inches overall. And last but not least, the Spyderco Para 3. Spyderco Para 3 is coming in at 7.25 inches overall. So how is the action on this guy? Guys, I have done that many times on this channel, and there have been many different, you know, feelings of action that I have really just, you know, exclaimed in joy over, right? I felt a lot of smooth knives. I felt a lot of drop shut knives that are drop shut just because of the weight and mass of the blade, and I can feel a little friction in there. And I felt, you know, just so much, just extensive in between. Some of the greatest, you know, there are knives out there that I've handled that I've just thought, how could it possibly get better than this? But each time I handle a Shirogorov, I am so infinitely impressed. And even on their designs that had washers, truthfully, every time has been just a little bit better than the other knives that have been what I called the best. It's hard for me to say what's the best because there is an increasing marginal difference, right? As you go up in price, and I'm handling all these things that are just amazing pieces of craftsmanship, right? And they have these elements to them, and I feel the action like, oh my gosh, it's so buttery smooth. Fall shut action on a $20 to $100 knife is not the same thing as this. Even the fall shut action that I've felt on knives that cost $300, $400, $500, $600, $700, no. The closest thing to this that I have ever felt is either the Holt Spectre, the V3 and V4 that I handled, or the Koenig Arius, which I've now handled 2 of those. Those 2 are head and shoulders above anything else that I've ever felt, even from, you know, Riot or CFK. And yes, Hinder knives, right? I mean, the Hinder knives are great, but it's not the same thing. Then there's Shirogorov, and yeah, this is a step up. This is the smoothest action that I have ever felt, hands down. There is no friction. You know, there are a lot of knives where I could close my knives and claim I can't feel anything, but something about the balance between blade and handle, and obviously the incredible attention to detail, the tolerances, the multi-row bearing system. There's a lot. It's not any one thing. It's a bunch of different moving parts. It is a big blade. It is a heavy blade, but you can see there it's not falling ultra quick, right? It falls nice and slow. It doesn't rely entirely on the weight of the blade. It relies on, you know, a bunch of different parts working and moving together in perfect unison. I don't think that I can describe that with any more detail, and believe me guys, rest assured when I say this, I have never felt a knife that was as smooth as this. This is absolutely stunning. I am blown away by it. The action is perfect. On top of that, the detent is tuned very nicely. Oh, there's a detent ball ramp too, by the way. So like right here, Yeah, it doesn't matter really where your thumb is. I mean, it can be right here, it can be out of the way. It just glides nicely over that spot, so it's fine. The flipper tab, not aggressive in any area. It's got some nice jimping. You can see there all the attention, all the corners and everything like that. Nothing is sharp, nothing is awkward. Everything is perfectly symmetrical where it needs to be. And I mean, like the angle that you approach that with your finger, you just essentially rest your finger right here, just press down diagonally, and it will flip every single time. This is one of those knives where it is not possible for it to fail. Even straight up like that, it doesn't matter if I'm using my index finger or if I'm using my thumb, it doesn't matter. It is going to fire, and it feels good when it fires. It's got a nice, it does have a reasonably heavy detent, but because of the weight and mass of the blade, the angle of the flipper tab, right, it's easy to get leverage there and fire it out, and it sounds good and it feels good. It has that snap. It's got everything that I look for in the right action. Truly flawless, perfect. I have no critiques on the action whatsoever. It's not, I mean, it's just not there. It's just perfect. All right, let's go ahead and talk about carry profile. So up against the Spyderco Para 3, in terms of thickness, it's slightly thicker. I mean, we're not talking about insane thickness here, but it is slightly thicker. You know, the materials in general are fairly thick. Carry profile up against the Spyderco Para 3 and PM2, two knives that have awkward carry profiles and nobody ever seems to complain about. It is undoubtedly longer than both, but I mean, it is a large knife, but you can see there in terms of height, even including the flipper tab, it's nowhere near as tall as the tallest areas of the PM2 and Para 3. So really you're just looking at a little bit of excess thickness and length, but the profile of the object is fantastic. On the inside here, I'm sure you could guess, we do have extensive milling on the inside, which I think is excellent. That is definitely adding to that feeling of balance. This is a large knife, and it's not, I'm not going to call this slender. It looks slender because of the lines in the profile, but it's not slender. I mean, like, those of you who own the ZT0452CF, that's a long, slender looking knife, but it's not really slender. It's pretty big, right? It's kind of the same thing going on here. So we do have a big object that's not super thick, a little bit thick. And you know, has this incredible balance to it, right? So let's go ahead and weigh it real quick. The overall weight of the Shirogorov Quantum coming in at 4.76 ounces. That's really incredible. Full titanium and a 4-inch blade at under 5 ounces. Boy, I was impressed with the SOCOM Elite at a little over 5, and that was aluminum. This is amazing. I'm happy with that. A lot of you are gonna, you know, if you don't like to carry big blades, right? If your weight limit essentially is where the Para 3 lightweight and bug out is, then you're probably not gonna enjoy this. But anybody wearing regular pants, right? You're not gonna have any problem with this whatsoever. You know, even in some situations, there's just not a lot sticking out here with the flipper tab, right? If it were me and I was gonna carry this, this would be the only thing in my knife pocket, 100%. But yeah, I could comfortably carry this all day. It lands perfectly within my preferred carry range between 4 and 6.5 ounces. I have no issue with the weights whatsoever. It's not going to be for everybody, and it's not going to be legal for everybody, so keep that in mind. I would do a hardware check for you guys, but as you can see here, we have this very interesting, and it's very, I think it's exclusive to Shirogorov. I think some other manufacturers or makers have kind of borrowed that design, but the first time I ever remember seeing a screwhead like that was Shirogorov. You can absolutely approach these with a flathead. You can see there it's essentially a Chicago end on the other side. I don't know how the internal pivot is shaped. I'm going to guess it's D-shaped. I am not going to try to take this apart. No way. I don't know if they actually do make a specific tool, if you can get a specific tool from Shirogorov to disassemble this, or if it comes with it. I honestly am not sure. I just received this knife in a pouch, but the important thing is that if it doesn't, you'll be able to turn this with a very common flathead screwdriver or a penny if you actually are going to use and carry it and at some point disassemble it. So no problem there whatsoever. On top of that, pivot, body screw, just the other side, the Chicago end, and then underneath here we have, where's my flashlight? Yeah, they have a hidden screw, the screw that's holding in the pocket clip, so you get to enjoy the aesthetic on this side without having another screw, right? And then it looks like there's a fairly large size Torx head. Yeah, that looks like a T8 Torx for the steel lock bar insert, which I would never take out, but I guess if you have to, right, then there you go. Unbelievably simple construction. Most of the excess integrity is coming from this large titanium backspacer, which is fixed in there on the top, I would imagine with another screw somewhere, but I'm not sure exactly where it's located. And like I said, I'm not going to try and take it apart. So it doesn't require a lot of excess hardware. You get to enjoy the nice clean aesthetic, right? And the screws that are there have their own, you know, their own kind of pizzazz going on, right? The Shirogorov pizzazz. I love the aesthetic of this knife. Absolutely wonderful. Have we talked about everything there? I think we have. Let's go ahead and get on to the aesthetic. This is not contoured. It is just very intricately shaped. And, you know, like the nice milling lines on titanium and the nice rounding, it is something that you can get from a less expensive knife, but there's something in excess here. And I think it's the overwhelming sense of everything just being absolutely perfect, right? When I look over a $200, $300 titanium frame lock, I see what I consider to be general perfection. The truth is that every now and then I look really, really close, I see like, you know, maybe the machine slipped or something in like this microscopic place, right? Or little tiny things that would matter to nobody and they wouldn't affect anything in terms of utility or structural integrity, right? They're just little tiny weird things, or like gaps around the hardware, right? Certain like fitment details, or just little tiny things, even maybe in the engraving of the logo, right? Or the fitment of the backspace, or just some odd teeny tiny little corner that would matter to nobody. And it's only something that I noticed after weeks and weeks of, you know, essentially handling and looking over the knife, which is the case here. I have had this knife for, I think, 4.5 weeks now. I think I've had a lot of time to look this knife over, and it is completely and totally flawless. I just finished a conversation with Al the Science Pal on Instagram, and I said, dude, there's not a single flaw in this thing. They take this seriously. If you're the type of person that's like, I want to spend some money, but I'm really nitpicky. Like, I literally go over my knife with a magnifying glass. I throw that around a lot on this channel, right? And it seems figurative. If you are legitimately the type of person to take a magnifying glass, and yeah, I actually have one handy here. It's because I am that type of person. If you do that, this just Shirogorov. That's where you want to be. I mean, you know. Arguably, the Koenig and the Holt Spectre is going to be right up there. But truthfully, yeah, if you want to be absolutely certain that there is not a single fit and finish issue on the entire knife, I can confidently say, based on the Shirogorovs that I have handled, and especially this guy, that you will not find an aesthetic flaw on this knife. It is just wonderful. And I know it's like, stop talking about it and show us, right? Show us the close-ups of everything. Absolutely perfect fitment on everything. I mean it. I mean, there just isn't a flaw. Look at this. The centering on that. It's just stupid. Stupid good. All right. All the edges here are nicely knocked down. There's not a sharp area to be felt anywhere, and even the pocket clip. You know, I think I remember feeling a Shirogorov or some knife that was similar, had a similar shaped pocket clip, and I was like, oh, the pocket clip's pointing. Not really on this guy. You know, you can see there they took that extra step to just knock that little area down, and it's able to be sunk into the pocket a little bit. You can see this area here. It's not actually on the relief cut. It's actually resting on this little, I mean, where it contacts the frame is actually that little area right back here that's sort of milled. That's kind of ingenious because you get the pocket clip will still easily slip over your pants, but it makes the profile of the pocket clip in relationship to the blade not so, it doesn't create this big excess height right here. So, and it's also not an ergonomic hotspot. It's just very comfortable to hang on to and lock into. There's some nice non-aggressive jimping up here. Plenty of room for your hand. You've got a little space to move around. It's just fantastic. I mean, it's a big knife. It should be that way, but it's as comfortable as anybody could hope for it to be. You're also not, you know, confined to a specific location because of certain areas on the knife. They have sort of suggestions here for areas of your fingers, but you can kind of move around and be comfortable wherever. The blade is ridiculous. I cannot believe that this is a hand ground blade. It just blows my mind. I mean, this is perfection and symmetry and finish work and everything. Every last little line goes right where it should. No sharp edges anywhere except for the edge, which believe me guys, this is a nice, thin, sharp edge. Very performance oriented. You can make use of all 4 inches of that cutting belly because there is nothing in the cutting path. They've added a little bit of character here, which is nice. You can see there this little slot in the blade. I don't know if you call it a fuller or what you call it. It's basically, I mean, it serves no utilitarian function. It's essentially just, sorry, we're down here with the pipe so you can hear everything running. But it's essentially just a nice little area on the blade that's just nice to look at, that gives it character, you know, where I think it's necessary, because if you could imagine without that little slot that's milled in there, the blade would be almost too plain, right? They've added character to it, and we've got this sort of upswept, it's not, I don't know if it's really upswept, kind of, a little bit, sort of trailing point, I guess. Normally, I am not a fan of really aggressive trailing points, but this is one that kind of trails and then just becomes straight, and it fits perfectly with the overall curvature. There's slight curvature in this knife, but not so much that it's like this big, crazy, wavy, you know, where it would make it like really inconvenience during a certain task. This blade shape is going to be good for so many different things. You have so much cutting edge. You've got a flat that runs out about 65% or so the length of the blade. We have a blade stock thickness of, let me go ahead and see if I can, yeah, I can measure it like that. Let me go ahead and turn the calipers on. I'm going to guess it's about 160 thousandths. That's a guess. It might be 150. Or maybe it's less than that. I don't know. Let's find out. Okay, 155 thousandths. That's fine. Plenty of strength all the way out to the tip, despite it actually having that trailing point, which is usually results in a very delicate tip. Not in this case. You do have quite a bit of thickness out there, but then, you know, plenty of room to drop towards the edge, and it just gets so nice and thin down here. It's awesome. Wonderful. Let you guys take a look at the lock up there. They even milled the lock bar insert. The area of disengagement is so plentiful. I mean, it's so easy to get your finger in there and engage. I mean, they thought of every last little thing. It's so comfortable to engage and disengage. I will say this. It isn't so smooth that it's just like rocketing down towards your hand like you know, like a Grimsmo Norseman. Now, I'm not saying that Grimsmo is good, Shiro is bad, or that, you know, Shiro is better than Grimsmo. I'm saying that they've got the friction so, you know, there's so little friction in the Shirogorov or in the Grimsmo blade, and it's so nose heavy that it really wants to come down on your fingers like a guillotine. They've got just enough surface contact, I think, on everything else in there, and they've got a lot of the weight more around this area of the blade. So the blade is absolutely frictionless, but it doesn't so readily fall towards your fingers that you have to be conscious of it every single time. You do have to be, you do have to kind of choose between either stopping it here and then moving it out of the way, or deciding to just do more of this, right? Because if your finger's here and you try to bring it all the way down, there's so much cutting edge that you're going to end up on your fingernail, or in some cases, your finger. That's not a design flaw. It's just something that you guys need to be aware of if you're going to pick this up and you're going to play with it, right? Because it's got a lot of blade. That can happen. So just when you get it, if you decide to pick this up, and if I can, I'll provide a link down there, but I don't think these are still available. It's something you're going to have to pay attention to. Love the positioning and look of the backspacer. You can see little tiny details like how they fit the backspacer in here, how they milled this. I think they're mostly just aesthetic lines, but it just looks like everything was sort of slid into place and locked in, right? Not that it was just like this goes between these two and they just go together. No, it kind of looks like everything was, you know, specifically made to just sort of like form together. And I like that. I like the little tiny details here. All these chamfered edges. There's so much excess chamfering going on every last little corner of this knife. The gear pattern backspacer is wonderful. This area back here where all these lines meet up, and there's just so much complexity here. And yeah, if you want to put a lanyard on it, you can. Pocket clip, same thing. Extra layers of complexity, extra milling lines, extra chamfering, right? Shape of the pocket clip goes perfectly with the design and has that area that makes it easy to slip in and out of your pocket, but it's not a hot spot and it's not creating a massive amount of excess thickness here. More milling, more chamfering lines in all these little areas down here. There's just there's not a spot on this knife where there's not something going on. I mean, I can tell that, you know, during the creation or the conception of this design, they were like, where is there a blank spot? Where's a blank spot? Let's knock it down. Let's add some complexity, some aesthetic complexity, right? The nice thing is that they've done this without taking away from the design or making it too busy, and without taking away from the utilitarian benefits of the knife itself. in its base form, this knife is just a knife and it's going to cut really, really well, right? There's lots of knives in different price ranges that do that, but there are not a lot of knives out there that have this insane level of just complexity, all the fine little details and everything, and making sure that it's perfect, right? The more complexity you add to it, if you're gonna promise perfection within that complexity, right? That's a heavy promise. Even at $1,000, right? There's a lot there that you could mess up and ruin, you know, the whole aesthetic flow, but they did it. They just did it so well. Like I mentioned, nice early but very solid lockup, and I believe, let's take a look on the inside here. Yeah, lots of shouldering around a huge stop pin. Lots of surface contact. Knife is locking up very early at something like, you know, 15% or so, but it is very solid. And then the blade is absolutely 100% perfectly centered. Boy, the only downsides to this knife, guys, are, number one, it seems to be unavailable right now. You can probably find it in some weird corners of the internet, or maybe they, you know, popped up in some retailers that I don't know about. But they're not always going to be available. These are going to be short-run knives, right? Number two, it's expensive. That right there, doesn't matter how well it's made, that's going to turn a lot of people off. For those of you who are, you know, interested in either bumping up to this tier of, you know, cost, or you're already here and you're just curious about Shirogorov knives and you're like, are they that good? Yeah, especially if you are a stickler for fit and finish and overall execution. I truly believe that I don't think I've ever handled a knife that was more perfect than this one. And I've said that before, but very rarely. And you have to understand that as any of us acquire new things in a specific category, right, it is inevitable that at some point we will handle something that is better than our last perfect, right? We can only define perfect based on what we've experienced so far, right? But this is even more perfecter than the Holt. Yeah, I know that that's not grammatically correct, but yeah, this is just crazy. It's perfect. If you're looking to spend this type of money and you're just like, I need it to be truly flawless, under a microscope I need it to be flawless, boy, the Shirogorov Quantum is hard to beat. And on top of that, you're getting a very, very well made, I mean, just in terms of the design, right, the blade geometry, the handle shape, the ergonomic lines, I mean, this is just wonderful. I said this to Al the Science Pal, and I'll say it again here. This is one of the very greatest knives that has ever come across my table. This is truly just an absolute marvel. It seems impossibly perfect. I am so blown away that what they're saying there, I believe, is that the blades are hand ground. That is just incredible. Like I said, I'd have been thoroughly impressed even if I found out they were machine ground. It's insane. This knife is very close to flawless, very close to absolutely perfect. I mean, there's not really much you can complain about unless you just don't like a certain aesthetic feature, aesthetic line. You don't like a monochromatic look. I think they do, you know, I don't know that any knife can truly be perfect, right? But if that's the case, if nothing can be perfect, this is as close as I've ever experienced. This is wild, man. Absolutely wild. You guys have one last demo of that action. How about a slower one? Let's see if we can tilt it to give you... oh, God! Crazy. Alright, guys. That's going to be pretty much it. I've gushed long enough. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like. So check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that metal complex logo right there and subscribe, because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have